Alright, I gotta admit, I did not expect these two to be charge IDs. In retrospect, this makes sense since both Callisto and Albina certainly had the spirit of it, but Project Moon giving charge potency to Bones was not on my Season 7 bingo card. But to answer the question nobody here really takes seriously, should you get Albina, Faust, and Callisto Honglu? Well, let me ask you, do you like bleed count? Because you can find it on literally every clashable skill on Faust and all but one of Honglu's clashable skills. For reference, the only idea that was as close to matching the number of times bleed count appears in a damage healing skill was in Prince Merceau. No other Blood Fiends, no other Kurakumo, and certainly no Shi units mention stacking count as many times as these two. First off, Faust goes for a defensive to offensive phase change build with 2 kits and 3 different defensive skills to match, while Honglu more plays the role of a captain ID, buffing all other ring IDs on the field with Faust as the focus. Overall, if you're familiar with how modern charge ID scaling works, you've already got an idea on how to run these two. And if you have either the other ring IDs or a solid bleed team, these guys are gonna fall in quite nicely. That there's a TLDR. So now let's see what meets on this corpus. The House of Spiders, the Ring Apprentice Faust, is a charge bleed ID with a total of 9 skills that runs her playstyle based on this pseudo-charge status, Corpus Ingredient. Pulling from Faust's first passive, Fascia, my precious artwork, Corpus Ingredient is a form of charge that is both a potency and a count, and is generated by dealing HP or shield damage with skills, by killing the target, or by any outside effects that can raise or drop her charge amount. So for those familiar with the singing machine, just replace making music with making Corpus and you've got the same idea. And that damage generation's a good thing, because unlike charge IDs, most of hers and Honglu's skills won't give her Corpus Ingredient on use or hit. So don't expect her to get any consolation prizes if she doesn't win a clash. Of course, since she can get Corpus Ingredient potency, she will get some benefits after she spends enough meat charge. And lastly, any of her skills that can deal HP or shield damage count as ones that gain charge count, so don't worry about her or Honglu for that matter getting snubbed by ego gifts and MDs. But now that we know she's good at making flesh electricity, what exactly is it used for? That would be for her 2 phases, both of which are detailed in her Iron Maiden, the Self-Unbound Flow State, Artwork Fascia, and her Armor of Protection, Repression statuses and passives. To put all 4 of these into plain speak, Faust starts each fight in the defensive Iron Maiden status. Similar to her inspiration, being in the Iron Maiden state gives Faust her default skills, and when hit, deals pierce damage equal to a percentage of the last coin's damage from a skill, as well as bleed count for good measure. She also gains aggro on her leftmost skill, and nearly every defensive buff under the sun. Protection, defense level up, shield HP based on her current HP, those are the works. So if you happen to have her backlined in slot 8 and need to, say, have someone take a giant hit from a 1-coin skill after another ID died, well, that's an ideal scenario. I mean that seriously. It's an ideal that won't happen often because this form's only meant to act as a cocoon until you use enough Corpus Ingredient to get Faust some Corpus potency. Do that enough and you'll get her Artwork Fascia buff, which is a vehicle to get her a set of buffs based on how intense it is. Again, consider this similar to the buffs a charge unit gets from having potency. These include 4 stages with base power, a damage buff on enemies that have any kind of bleed, additional bleed potency and count application, and base power, but again, the only catch here is that the Iron Maiden form can't really make use of these, or at least not for more than 1 turn, because the instant she gets that core potency, she moves to her offensive form, the Self-Unbound Flow State. This state trades in all those defensive buffs for gaining more min and max speed, a new set of skills, and a general damage buff with those skills to any enemy that's slower. So while you may be giving away the safety of the Iron Maiden with this change, the rewards are pretty damn worth it even before you add in the Artwork Fascia effects. And if you're watching this, are over the age of 18, and live in a place where your folks are encouraging you to finally get your driver's license, consider this part a metaphor for the Project Moon YouTuber telling you to go do it, because a lasting freedom is greater than a momentary comfort. I hope you're inspired now, because if you are, then that's something else you have in common with this Faust. Her sin-powered passive, Inspired by Critique, will cause her to gain SP if she inflicts a negative effect with an attack skill, pulling right from the Ring's playbook of aggressive pointillism therapy, but on top of that, she has a buff that only makes sense if she's coupled with Maestro Honglu on the field. So while we're not going to dwell too long on this, just know it's an effect that is going to be valuable if you're midway through a fight and have Maestro Honglu with her. It is perfectly fine. Either way, her SP buff is what matters more, and it's worth watching for since that can lead to at least another 10% damage turn by turn with max SP. And then rounding out the passives, we have Iron Maiden Spikes as the support. This one works by making any allies that equip a defensive skill on their slots inflict bleed onto their attacker or bleed count if they already have some bleed potency. Now, as a regular reminder, kits do not show any limits per turn, per encounter, or per skill. They didn't tell us that Lord Honglu's Death Defiance is once per encounter, or that Photoelectricity only activates once per skill. So it's wishful thinking that you'll be able to stack a ton of bleed potency and count by putting the Living Torment Nexus in the backline without either a resin to limit it, or more likely, a limit to how many times it can activate per turn. As far as I'm concerned, it's a nice way to let her add some count off the field. But of course, we can't ignore all the frontline tools she's got, because whoo-hoo, boy, does she sure have 5 less skills and 4 others. And for simplicity's sake, let's break this down for each form. While in her Iron Maiden form, Albina Faust's most powerful skill is Repressed Flesh. This love letter to libraries Jae-hyun will give the fleshless puppet final power based on the target's bleed and a chance to cash in her corpus count to get more final power, and extra damage based on the corpus count cash. The coins themselves will inflict bleed potency and count, bind and damage down, with the last one dealing more damage based on the number of negative effects on the target. Speaking of which, expect to see that specific clause a lot over these two kits as well. I promise I am eventually just gonna not mention it anymore. Overall, it's nothing too extravagant, but she is using this more as a self-defense move than as a killing blow, so considering the form, it's still effective. Then comes her skill 2, Fascia Hungers. This one gets 3 effects on use, gaining more clash power based on the number of negative statuses, final power based on the target's bleed, and will juice her corpus count to gain clash power, and turn her final coin into a UB. And man, I know I said this before, but I really do like PM sprinkling in UBs on skills as of late. It just feels creative. The coins themselves will inflict a bleed count and a next turn bind on who they hit, and that potential unbreakable will allow Faust to get more corpus ingredient than usual. It's worth noting that this is the only skill she has in this form that allows her to do that. So if you're looking to quickly break through that homunculus's iron shell, using this skill is a solid way to start making your meat lair. And to round out the offensives, we have Butcher Ribs in the skill 1 slot. This is a simpler skill that works similarly to the skill 2 on use, gaining clash power based on the target's negative effects and final power based on the bleed. And it'll also apply bleed count, but will slap defense level down on the target and defense level up on herself for the next turn with the second coin. Personally, I don't mind throwing Team Fragile onto the enemy. Obligatory conversion chart goes here, but more than anything, this looks like a skill you'll throw out if you just need to count on some flesh or blood sticking around. But let's say that you use the skill 1 and want to make use of that defense level up. In that case, the Clashable Guard's looking pretty nice. Exhibition Arrangement sports an unbreakable coin and inflicts bleed count on the attacker, dealing pierce damage based on the enemy's bleed potency. Of course, both of these are dependent on you winning the clash, and regular reminder, these effects usually have a proc limit per turn, so consider yourself warned. So, nice! Now we know what tools Boneless Faust has to get that first bit of corpus potency. It really does feel like the skill 1 and 2 are there to build the count, and you save the skills 2 and 3 specifically for spending it and moving on. But since Fascia has several tiers of buffs, that means the skills you get after Faust hits her flow state are all you'll have to build the rest of the potency. So let's see how they stack up. Like before, we'll start with the most powerful skill, Liberation of the Repressed Flesh. This one is similar to its sister skill by gaining final power based on the target's bleed, but based on the ID trailer, it's got triple the attack weight with some attack weight damage insurance for good measure. So don't worry about opportunity cost if this hits a single target or part. And of course, this skill 3 on a charge unit is able to consume the corpus count to gain more final power, a damage buff, that attack weight from earlier, and even converts all of the coins to UBs, making all 4 of these effects guaranteed. Those being bleed potency and count, additional damage based on negative effects, and applying bind and damage down, and haste and slash damage up to enemies and herself respectively. As far as ult skills go, it's not the most impressive I've seen, but damn if it isn't a nice fit for a new ring ID that wants to stack debuffs like it's no tomorrow. Then we've got Time for Your Meal, Fascia. Much like the original, this skill 2-2 is useful for both juicing and collecting your corpus ingredient. In fact, it's virtually the same skill with only two minor differences. First, instead of gaining clash power based on the negative effects on the target, it'll deal more damage, and the second coin will apply haste to Faust as well as bind to the enemy next turn. While the lack of clash power may raise an eyebrow at first, we gotta keep in mind that Artwork Fascia can only give the base power buff to Faust when she has this skill active and not the original. So my best guess is that they wanted to make the focus on having the move hurt more rather than just clash better. Though of course there's a very solid chance that these second skills are just more powerful overall. And last on the power creep lineup is her skill 1-2, which is, hey, also called Butcher Ribs. Like seriously, they didn't even change the name on this one. In fact, the only non-numerical change they gave her was the same one they made to the skill 2. They took the negative effect on the target buff and swapped it from being clash power into extra damage. Again, it feels like the ID is factoring in the innate fascia buff and trying to compensate with extra damage instead of doubling down on clash power buffs. It's a neat idea, we'll see where it goes. But even if we're done with the power creep, we still have two extra skills waiting in the wings to play into the character lore. The exhibition begins is Eggbeater Faust's evade that harkens so sweetly back to her inspiration's other skill set by applying assist defense at combat start, and then applying bind on the attacker and haste on herself with a successful evade. While that's handy for getting her damage buff for being faster than the target, the more pressing part is the assist defense ability. For those unfamiliar with the term, assist defense is basically forced aggro that activates when an ally is about to take an unopposed attack. It'll make the enemy attack whoever's got AD instead and activate a skill that's only used under these circumstances. The thing is that assist defense has limited stacks, so if it runs out before the end of the turn, that's it. And in Faust's case, her assist defense exclusive is no acts of vandalism allowed, period. This gets the regular negative effect damage buff other skills have, as well as the only instance of coin power on this ID. When used, she'll gain coin power based on the target's bleed and can drink a corpus count smoothie to gain clash power and make the last coin unbreakable. That unbreakable coin specifically applying bleed potency, while the first coin applies bleed count. Overall, this is very much a scaling ID that may get the bulk of its buffs in the state change, but more of the subtle buffs, like the speed-based damage, SP heal, and extra bleed application from Fascia feel more fun to look at after the shift. So then, what kind of vision are we looking at? Well, she'll start off being better at having a defensive playstyle. While there is merit in having this ID act as a tank for hits that others couldn't deal so they could scale more easily, the roadmap for using her is pretty clear. Use her skills to get Corpus Ingredient, and then spend it so that she can get into her flow state, which is phase 2. After that, she's less able to tank, but now is able to protect other allies more offensively with her base power buffs, extra damage, and assist defense counters. But speaking as someone that enjoyed using Slosh Mail and other spiked tank playstyles, you've traded having a pointy stone for an actual unit that may be the Queequeg to your Ahab from time to time. Progression at this phase is still the same as ever. Turn some Glupos into Corpus, spend it, and keep putting the byproducts into more potency and Fascia stack. The playstyle can technically get more offensive over time with additional damage and bleed application buffs, but you really do have to go out of your way to be defensive at all with this ID. So while both phases have some defensive potential you can make use of without win rating, you can still very much get away with playing offensively to keep making your progress to phase 3. Cause once you max out those Fascia bonuses, you can invite your 3 favorite friends to your Galleria and have some District 23 sushi afterward with your skill 3 too. Granted, you might not need full Fascia in order to use that skill, but still, from here, there's no going back. She's fully online and can officially say that her sword thirsts for blood more convincingly than the edgy weeb she absolutely is not. Bless all of us that's a phase that Middle Ishmael managed to skip. Then again though, there's one thing I haven't really mentioned. We'll see our good friend Somatic Frisian inspiring melody may suddenly arrive. Why? Because it always does after enough time passes. We'll let Hong Lu say more about that, but for now, it's time to see what could ruin this ID. First, let's get these out of the way. Flash power averages and thresholds can be found here. If she can't meet those, uh-oh! Secondly, she needs to be able to get and spend charge quickly enough, which brings up an elephant in the room. In Kanto 9, Albina's Corpus Ingredient stack ended at 2 instead of Charge's regular 20. And while we're on the topic, Callisto's pseudo-charge statuses both capped out at 5 and 206. So since we can't get a clear one-to-one on how much skin charge to expect her to build and spend per turn, my suggestion is to look for just how much corpus she needs to consume to get its potency, and then look at how much she can get and spend in a turn. And using that, if, with no other ID supports, she can feasibly get to 1 CI potency in 3 turns, well then that's fine. All for the better if her alternative skills can spend and generate more corpses. In other words, if she struggles to get any fascia by turn 4, she's gonna be in some trouble. But that's also all I'm worried about, because even if the bleed count drops to 1 on each application, I'd still consider her a functional addition to a bleed potency rich team. But if you are less patient, there is always the... Ah, I see enough time has passed. He is here. The House of Spiders, the Ring Nursefather Hong Lu is a charge bleed ID, much like his pupil, that makes use of corpus ingredient in the exact same manner, including with his own passive to explain it. The main difference with him is that instead of fueling a form change, Kalongles here will use corpus potency to fuel his artwork tibia status. This status works like an upgraded fascia by having identical buffs in word to Faust's weapon, but with 3 base power buffs instead of 2. Now that being said, Hong Lu does still have his own defensive buff on entry. Well, so long as his stepdaughter's on the field. Viewing the Tableau is a status that is paired with Lobotomy Lu's Transcend the Corpus passive. He gets a certain amount of it once the encounter starts, and loses some at the end of every turn. And if he's working on a joint piece with Faust, then he'll also get protection at turn start. Now this may sound like it's just a way to mirror Faust's Iron Maiden at first, even in a minor way. But this status acts like a countdown clock to Hong Lu's most powerful skill, Closing Time, Installation Art number 1, Your Flesh and Bones as the gallery's seats. Once he runs out, one of his skills next turn will be replaced with this skill with assurance that even if you have, say, an ego skill from last turn that is permanently in your leftmost slot, you won't lose your chance. On top of that, Hong Lu won't even let stagger stop him from losing this skill, similar to how Faust will enforce her state chains once she gets fascia. In other words, if Papa Lu says it's closing time, it is closing time. And because this skill is so central to him, I'm gonna break a pattern we have here and skip over to exactly what that sucker does before we continue to the next passives. Closing Time Installation Art number 1, Your Flesh and Bones as the gallery's seats, has some effects we've become familiar with after Faust. On use, it both has attack weight insurance that will increase the damage for every leftover weight unused, and with a max attack weight of 5 from the trailer and extra damage on just 1 target, you don't have to worry about wasting the skill on just 1 bozo. And fitting to the archetype, he can then spend his flesh and blood as corpus charge to get more final power, damage based on the corpus, and attack weight that fuels the other damage buff we mentioned earlier. And after all those buffs are settled, the coins will inflict bleed, potency and count, bind, and damage down, as well as giving himself haste and slash damage up, proving once again that Callisto really was just trying to recreate himself in another body. God, I love that man's design, but he is so incredibly sad in a way no one else really is. The skill also applies an ID-specific status, Corpus Theater. And this status is a bleed or ring team's mark of death, since it'll activate whenever bleed is applied to the target. When that happens, the target will get a random amount of either bleed potency, bind, and defense powered down. And since the ring loves getting buffs based on the number of negative effects on enemies, this means that whatever is left of the living sculpture before you is only gonna get more dazzling as time goes on. And that leads me to one question. Did seeing that skill give you goosebumps? Because if it didn't, I'm sorry, but you literally cannot consider yourself a real member of the ring. After the attack, all ring identities heal SP and gain somatic frisson-inducing melody. Not only is that a fat chunk of words meaning goosebumps, but it's a status that both increases the min and max speed as well as the clash power and damage of any ring ID's base skills. This is the ominous status that was on Faust's kid and is what gets doubled with her sin-powered passive. It's also a buff that is devoid of any kind of means of expiring. Again, limits aren't on kits, but time limits on the statuses are. And when you put all this together, it tells an interesting story about this ID. Unlike Faust, Hong Lu's most powerful skill is not one that is gotten by increasing his corpus potency or getting a certain status on the enemy. It's made more powerful by it, sure, but he is destined to use this sucker after a designated amount of time. And that time gets shorter for every additional ring ID that's on deck. So on the one hand, you're getting a free, nigh guaranteed use of this skill for the low cost of some time, but that perk comes with one drawback, or rather, one limit. This man is not running a grocery store. He's not gonna call closing time twice. and all of these traits surrounding the skill heavily suggest that you'll only ever use it once. Hong Lu cannot get viewing the tableau again, and there isn't another mention in this kit on how closing time can be used another way. This is further supported by the funny somatic frisson not having any means of expiring. So if you want to get the full use out of those 5 unbreakable coins, get right on making that corpus ingredient count immediately. In any case, I hope this makes it clear why this skill in particular was worth mentioning before all the others, since it both makes use of 3 different statuses on the ID, and feels almost like an entire second playstyle slapped on top of this ID's regular loop. Oh, and while we're on the topic, if you're familiar with international loops like say the I-95 or other highways in the United States, and perhaps run the transportation department of a metropolis in your local area, any shot we can make some headway on a better public transit system? I've been looking outside these days and there's way too many scared kids on the road, and I would like to live in a walkable city before I die. If not, I get it, I'm just asking, just consider this an allegory for a Project Moon YouTuber finally giving you some civics critique. And if you like criticism, well, you'll love Hong Lu's sin-powered passive. A Maestro's Critique is another copy-paste effect from Ring Faust's kit that will give him SP whenever he inflicts a negative effect, and gives him, again, slash damage up next turn if he was at max SP. Alongside that, the Jade-Eyed Maestro will activate a separate effect when Faust uses any skill 3. He'll use a damageless and hitless skill 1-2 on her that effectively acts as an offense level buff for the turn. I'm sure he's just curious to see how well his pupil's work is going. And following that curiosity, we've got Hong Lu's support passive. Please do stop running and be seated will debuff an enemy with offense level down and bleed count next turn on any enemy with the fastest speed. This one feels pretty simple and kind of original for debuffing enemies instead of buffing allies. So if I could take a shot in the dark here, I'll say probably a Sin-owned passive, but regardless, we now have all of the passives accounted for. So let's see how he runs his exhibition on the field. Starting with another movie top Faust, Headbrace Hong Lu's curating the exhibition will inflict bind and give himself haste on evade, as well as assist defense at combat start. That assist defense then shows itself in his clashable counter, please, vandalism is prohibited, period. It's really the same as Faust's here, right down to the corpus buffs making the bleed potency coin unbreakable. Perfectly fine, just not much new to speak of. So how about we get over to the skill 3 that Ring Lu will use more than once. Tibia's Melody, anatomization of the unanatomized by the anatomized, has attack weight insurance, blood-fueled final power buffs, and chugs corpus count to get more FP, damage, up to 3 attack weight with corpus potency, and a full 4 coin UB conversion. The coins themselves will inflict the regular ring combo meal, bleed P and C with a side of bind and a small damage down, with self-haste and splash damage up next turn. For all the terminology I'm throwing at you, just consider this to be a skill that's between the strength of Faust's regular skill 3 and her improved skill 3. Thankfully though, I can say the skill 2 is a bit more original. Gather Ingredient Blood-Bathed Objet matches every other base skill on this list by gaining final power based on the target's bleed and spends corpus to do that again. And it also inflicts bleed count and bind, but he will also get haste again and gets more corpus count. But the last coin also gets to launch an additional skill on the target if they have enough negative effects. And that skill is Installation Art number 3, Improvised Ribcage. This extra skill doesn't trigger defensive skills, snacks on some corpus, and is the most unique skill in the kit. Thank you, finally! Not only does it inflict bleed and hurt more based on negative effects, but it acts as an SP vampire and is the only skill in Hong Lu's kit that can repeatedly inflict corpus theater. So if for whatever reason you beef your special closing time move, any big boss you fight can still get struck with artistic inspiration in the most violent way possible here. And last but not least, we've got Anatomize. This skill 1 has the regular negative effect damage buff and bleed based final power buff, and well, is just Ring Faust again. I know he's the one that taught her this, but this really is identical when we strip away the potential changes in clash power. Run it if you want to generate corpus and apply some defense level shenanigans, and looking at it again, I guess it's a debuff no other skill in his kit has those, so that's something, right? And now, with all of his exhibits in the books, let's see what exactly Tall Metal Hong Lewis is trying to get us to see. Well, from the get-go, this ID works by only having 2 real phases. Either you're at max tibia, or you're on your way to getting it. Exactly like Faust, you're gonna focus on getting and using corpus like Mephi having to go at top speeds through a crowd of backstreets rats. Your progression is entirely determined by how well you gain corpus from all skills and consume it from both skill 2s and skill 3s and counter. So if you've only got skill 1s and ground beef in your hands, feel free to go on the defensive to put it to some good use. But once you're at full tibia, it's all a matter of going ham just like with Faust. However, that change doesn't address how much Hong Lu likes to have a hands-on grand finale. So we're gonna add in something I'll call Phase X, which is probably going to happen between Phases 1 and 2. I cannot stress that enough. But it's such a strange phenomenon that I feel it's necessary to call it something other than a number. Getting to Phase X will drastically change your priorities for a couple of turns and is controlled more by your team comp than Hong Lu himself. Since viewing the tableau drops whenever any other ring unit uses a skill, bringing in Faust, Ring Song, or Rodus will accelerate how quickly you reach Phase X. So just keep in mind, the more ring IDs you bring in, the more you need to focus on either getting a lot of Corpus ingredient quickly, or accept that those 5 unbreakable coins won't come at max power. And that doesn't have to be an issue. Either is fine, the only wrong answer here is the one you didn't intend to happen, so just have some forethought and everything's gonna be okay. Once you make use of Hong Lu's closing time skill though, that will begin Phase X, in which your ring IDs can wield their goosebumps against up to 5 Corpus Theaters to reach the maximum damage potential all around. Once that wave of Corpus Theater is properly juiced or the enemies die, you'll return to Hong Lu's own priorities and keep focused on building that tibia until you're at the max stack. That's all there is to it. And now, last but not least, how could he be ruined? Well, a lot of what could ruin Faust also applies to Hong Lu. Flash power, Corpus production and use, but unlike her, viewing the tableau is in an odd position where it could be difficult to use if not in a certain sweet spot of turns. If it drops to 0 too early, you won't have a good chance to make the attack strong with Corpus potency and count. But if they make it take too long, then unless you have a full team of ring IDs, you won't ever use it. For similar reasons to Faust potency gain, I'd hope that closing time can reasonably see use around turn 4 or 5 at latest without needing a full ring team. Because personally, I'd prefer a skill I use and appreciate at its middling power than a super strong skill I'll just never use. But who knows? Maybe there's a certain support ID that if put in good hands can choke out an extra charge counter too for Hong Lu. That's all from me though, so what do you think? I'm excited to see how both of these suckers support bleed teams, but don't have any of that time to try and prescribe those. Y'all can work out what kind of bleed teams you think they should be in the comments, and while you do that, here's the member and patron Q&A. Alright, today's member and patron Q&A comes from Sharkig again, and I decided to get a slightly indulgent one. In the time of making content, have you ever felt burned out or wanted to take a break? It's important for anyone after all. I'm picking this one because it's kinda relevant now, and the answer is yes, though it's less just because I'm not really feeling it and more because I kinda just want to find ways to improve stuff, and sometimes you gotta take time to do the research for that and experiment. Only thing about it is that lately I've been trying to see if there's anything I can do to spice up some of the essays or maybe some gameplay ideas, and while I found a couple of ways, like with Minty's art, if anyone saw the roadmap stream I like, I'm kind of just learning that not everything needs to be spiced up, and sometimes perfect is the enemy of good. So I'm running with that for now, letting the creativity come where it does, and prepping up a lot of essays for the intervalo, cause oh boy, that feels like it's gonna fill in a good number of gaps to be able to talk about a lot more soon. So hey, who knows? Decent chance we'll see more lore soon. Fingers crossed.